So we're going to start the afternoon session with the registering property indicator. As in the other two indicators we discussed in the morning, the registering property indicator is also based on case study assumptions. We assume that there is going to be a transfer of property, of a commercial warehouse to be exact, between two domestic limited liability companies. And in this indicator, we also record what happens before the registration, during the registration, and what happens after the registration. And we stop assessing when the buyer can actually use the property to either resell it or to give it as a collateral if needed. So this is when we assume that the transfer of the property was officially done. We assume that the commercial warehouse is actually a two-story warehouse, and we will discuss a little bit more in the next slides what are the details of the case study assumptions. The indicator is divided into 4 equal indices. The first one measures the procedures that are needed to transfer the property. And as I mentioned earlier, it stops at the time when the buyer can use it to either sell it again or to use it as a collateral. We assess the time that is needed to complete this property transfer, and the cost is calculated as a percentage of the property value. In the fourth index, we measure the quality of land administration index. So here it's divided into 5 different sections that we will discuss later in detail. The first one being the reliability, transparency, and coverage of land administration system, protection against land disputes, and equal access to property rights. Again, it's important to mention that we have online procedures that we count as half a day at the minimum, and we have the procedures that are carried out in person. The time is calculated based on the median of the time that we received from our contributors, and the cost is always the official cost, so it does not take into account any bribes that must be paid even if they lead to a speeding of the process. So if we know that there are any extra payments that are being done, we would ask the contributors how long it would take to carry out a procedure without having to pay this extra money. So, to discuss the case study assumption, we take into account the fact that we have a seller that's going to decide to sell a property. We also consider that the seller has already found the buyer and the price is already defined. So there is no negotiation that is taking place. We also assume that the transfer is not an initial registration, which means the title has already been registered and we're registering it for a second time, at least to the buyer. We consider the commercial warehouse to being in the economy's largest business city, and to be exact in the peri-urban area, but still within city limits. We assume that both companies, the buyers and the sellers, are 100% domestically owned and they're limited liability companies. We assume the seller has owned the warehouse for 10 years. And the property of the warehouse, it's fixed as 50% of GNI per capita. We assume that the property is free of titles and there is no mortgages on it. So taking into account all of these case study assumptions, we check whether there is a need to do any due diligence procedures, and if yes, how these due diligence procedures are done. We take into account the need to do a title search to check if there are any encumbrances on the property, if there is need to check the maps or check for any unpaid taxes. Then we moved into checking how the sale and purchase agreement is going to be signed, if there is a need, for example, for it to get notarized, if it needs to be drafted by lawyers or notaries. Then we check how the payments is going to be done for the stamp duties, how taxes are paid, if there are any registration taxes, and finally, how the registration at the land or property registry is going to take place. And here we end, as I mentioned earlier, by assuming that the property is registered and is ready to be sold again if needed, or is ready to be given as collateral. In the quality of land administration measured, as I mentioned earlier, we have 5 different categories. The first one is about the reliability of the land administration. And here it's important to measure this aspect of land administration systems because they provide up-to-date information that would be sufficient to make meaningful inferences of ownership. Transparency is important as it would inform the public about transaction possibilities, and it would foster the development of a unified and more efficient land market. Coverage is also important in order to make sure that all the information is accessible to third parties, and thus they're enforceable to anyone. And it's important also to be able to verify all transactions and have them publicly authenticated at the registry. The dispute resolutions are important, as if we have any unclear responsibilities in land transaction, this would lead to having more land dispute, and it would divert the land from using it productively. So the more clear responsibilities there are in the land registries, the less number of unresolved disputes. And finally, the Quality of Land Administration Index measures also the equal access of married or unmarried women to property right. Equal access to property right can help indeed increase the competitiveness of an economy or increase its labor force. Now we can talk about each of the 5 sub-indices that I mentioned earlier. The first one being the Reliability of Infrastructure Index. This index has a maximum score of 8 points. We have, it assesses basically the format in which property rights are stored. It assesses whether the information is electronically available, and how databases for land ownership and cadastral maps are linked. If you want to look into more details about what the index assesses, these are the 6 questions on the indicator. As we can see, there is the question in the middle that assesses how maps of land plots are kept at the mapping agency of the largest business city of the economy. In total, Azerbaijan has a score of 7 points out of 8 on this index. And this is the question where Azerbaijan does not have the full score on it. Again, the information here that I'm presenting is valid as of May 2nd, 2018. So this was about a year ago and not the information that has been collected right now. And again, as of May 2nd, 2018, it was considered that the land plot maps are scanned and stored in the system that way, as opposed to them being digital. And the best practice would, of course, having interactive maps in the system. The second index is about the Transparency of Information Index. This is very important as it would increase the efficiency of the land market, and it also helps reduce asymmetries of information between users and officials. Also, a transparent land administration system minimizes the possibility of having bribes, of having any sort of informal payments and abuses in the system. This index has a maximum score of 6 points. Azerbaijan has a score of 3 out of 6 on this indicator. And here again, we see wherever the points are highlighted in yellow, the answers of Azerbaijan, these particular questions, as of May 2nd, 2018, and where Azerbaijan does not receive the full score. The first one being the information on the land ownership that is not made publicly available. And from the information that we received, this information is made available only to interested parties. Then we have the question about having a specific and independent mechanism to file complaints at the Immovable Property Registration Agency. And we have the same question at the end about filing complaints at the mapping agency. So here it's important to look at two aspects on these questions. So we must have an agency that is specific, which means that only deals with either Immovable Property Registration Agency and problems there, or another agency that looks at the problems that are occurring at the cadastre. So they have to be specific of each of these two problems. And the second part is having this agency being independent, which means the agency that is looking at the problems that occurred at the Immovable Property Registration Agency should be completely independent from the Immovable Property Registration Agency itself. And same thing with the cadastre. Whoever is going to be the agency looking at the problem occurring at the cadastre must be completely independent from the cadastre itself.
Problemlərə baxan agentlik kadastrdan tamamilə müstəqil olmaz.
Score is the access to the land plot, which again, according to the information we had received last year, this information is only available to interested parties. The next index is about geographic coverage. So here, it's important to have a reliable and transparent land administration system. And it must cover the entire area of the economy. We noticed that when the land registries do not provide complete geographic coverage, companies and individuals cannot be sure where the area is not covered at the registry might be relevant to their interest. Also, the maximum score on this index is 8 points. Azerbaijan scores 0 out of 8 on the geographic coverage index. So here the questions that we look at are whether there's a complete coverage of the land registry, first at the level of the largest business city, so for example in Baku, and then if there is a complete coverage of the land registry at the economy level, which is Azerbaijan. Then we ask the same questions about the maps, so how complete the coverage of the mapping agency is, whether at the largest business city or at the economy level. Then we look at the Land Dispute Resolution Index, which has a final score of 8 points. As I mentioned earlier, it is very important to have a land dispute system that is clear and that assigns clear responsibilities to stakeholders involved in land transactions, and that would provide an effective mechanism to resolve any dispute that can arise from it. Azerbaijan has a score of 7.5 points out of 8. So there's only half a point that is missing, and that's the question where we highlighted the no in yellow. This question has to do with whether there is a specific compensation mechanism in place in order to cover for losses that are incurred by parties who engage in good faith transactions based on erroneous information that they receive from the Immovable Property Registry. Finally, we have the Equal Access to Property Rights Index. This index is a little bit different in terms of scoring, as the maximum number of points that you receive on it is actually 0. So basically, if there is a difference in the ownership rights of unmarried men and unmarried women, or married men and married women, then in that case, we will be subtracting points from the economy on the quality index of this indicator. And here we can subtract up to 2 points and 1 point on each of the 2 questions that we can see on the PowerPoint presentation. So what are the main findings in the Doing Business 2019 report? We see again here the list of top 10 performers, with New Zealand being in the first position, followed by Rwanda, Lithuania, Georgia, Belarus, Estonia, United Arab Emirates, Kyrgyz Republic, Slovak Republic, and Sweden. And we see next to them the number of procedures that are needed to complete the transaction as mentioned earlier according to our case study assumptions. How many days is needed to complete these transactions, what's the cost, and how much each of these countries score on the Land Administration Index. In 2017-2018, there are 20 economies who carried out reforms on the registering property indicator. And this was done by increasing the reliability of infrastructure, increasing the transparency of information, reducing taxes and fees, reducing the time to complete the transaction, and increasing administrative efficiency. What are the results for Azerbaijan in the Doing Business 2019 report? So Azerbaijan scored 85.63, with 100 being the frontier. And as a result, Azerbaijan ranks 17th out of 190 countries on this indicator. It takes 3 procedures to transfer the real estate property. It takes 5.5 days, and it costs 0.1% of the property value. As for the quality of land administration index, it has a score of 17.5 out of 30 points. So according to the Doing Business 2019 report, and as of May 2nd, 2018, Azerbaijan had 3 procedures in order to complete the transfer of property title. First, it was necessary to verify the title and obtain a non-encumbrance certificate. This was normally done online and it took half a day. Then it was necessary to go to the notary and have the sale and purchase agreement drafted and notarized. And then the buyer would request from the land agency to obtain the updated title. And here we had multiple options in order to obtain the updated title, depending on the amount of money paid to obtain it. In Doing Business 2019, Azerbaijan had reforms recorded on the registering property indicator. So during the second half of 2017, the State Committee had upgraded the website to publish statistics on the number of property transactions for the largest business city as well as the entire country. Also, the Ministry of Justice had upgraded their website to publish statistics on the number of land disputes in the first instance court. And in doing so, Azerbaijan increased their score on the quality of land administration's index by improving their transparency on the land dispute resolution index. We see here a slide again that shows how Azerbaijan ranks with other comparative economies from the Europe and Central Asia. And we can see how Azerbaijan compares in terms of procedure, in terms of time, the cost of the transfer, and the quality of land administration index.